Good evening, everybody. I'm Leslie McCain, Executive Director of the Illinois Solar Energy and Education Association, and we're very excited tonight to be able to talk about clean energy policy. We would ask that as you come up with questions, you just put them in the chat. There's a chat there at the bottom of your page. Hopefully everybody at the bottom of the screen, I think. Hopefully everybody's in front of a computer to catch this, but we are recording right now. And so we will post this on the website and send it out to the registered attendees probably sometime tomorrow. There's a little bit of magic that has to happen on Nicola's side to get that together. So again, you can put your questions in the chat. We're going to hold questions to the end. We're going to let Tim get through the whole presentation. And then if there's time, we'll ask folks just to raise their hands if they wanted to, ask a question verbally after we read the written questions in the chat. So I think we're in pretty good shape. So I just want to thank Tim Milburn so much for taking the time to put this significant presentation together for us. There's, as I said earlier, there's quite a bit of interest. We have well over 100 people registered to participate tonight. Although this presentation was promoted as find out everything about CEJA, we're going to find out a lot about CEJA tonight, but we're going to be looking at that in a broader context of what is happening with clean energy policy, both internationally, federally, and then here in the state, and how all that dovetails together to ensure supportive policies. So again, I want to welcome Tim. Tim Milburn is a partner at Green Ways to Go and is committed to providing business and technical advice and ideas, as well as developing projects which advance the use of sustainable energy and environmental alternatives to conventional energy practices. Though focused on vehicle electrification and alternative fuel infrastructure, Tim is also passionate about solar energy and recently had a system installed on his home. Tim has previously presented for ISEA on the ABCs of EVs and how electric vehicles and solar can work together. And you can see that that's a testament to Tim's belief is his home and his EV there on the screen. So Tim, I'm going to hand the mic to you. You've got about 60 participants eagerly awaiting all of your pearls of wisdom. So thanks again.
Well, thank you, Leslie. I really appreciate the invitation. I hate to admit it, but I like talking about this stuff. I've become a bit of a wonk over the last few years, and hopefully I can convey some of the useful bits today. And I also want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I know this is an important set of subjects for everyone on the call, and a big part of the battle is learning and finding out where we are in the kind of the maze of climate policies and acronyms, the alphabet soup of things. So what I'm going to try and do tonight is tie in, starting at the top with the COP26 and coming down to your local, your home, your business, and how it all fits together, as Leslie said, and with a focus on kind of the CEJA activities surrounding renewable energy, solar in particular. So the goal is to tie it together and make sense of it. I also just wanted to share with you, this is a picture taken about a year ago with a drone of my home, where I have been charging my electric vehicle in the driveway there with solar electrons now for a year. So I'm kind of proud of that. I also have a wireless charger for what that's worth. I've also been an ISEA member since about 2012. So solar is a passion. Moving on, I wanted to just sort of set the stage. These are kind of my outlooks on what we're really trying to do. I'm talking about climate change, again, solar focus, but it really is, we have a great opportunity to do something about climate. And we need to do this by having a fair set of programs about energy, environmental, and societal demands. So we need responsible policies and programs, which is really what we're going to talk about. And that allows us to mitigate negative externalities, level the playing field for shared public resources, systematically and equitably advance disadvantaged communities and jumpstart clean energy solutions through smart incentives. And on the other side of the ledger, we can't forget about the free market. We need businesses to be successful. They play a critical role in clean energy. And the tough part is we have to do a lot of change in terms of who owns the power, not the electrical power, but the political power. And a lot of it gets into education consensus building to be successful. So I'm going to start out just touch on climate change basics, which I think everybody pretty well knows, but it is part of the framework. Then talk about the kind of the policies top to bottom with a solar focus, and then kind of look at the accountability and how we're going to measure things and what kind of opportunities are out there for us, and then talk about some next steps. So most of this is probably familiar to all of you, but when we look at the policies that have been created from the top down, these are the common themes. You have mitigation of all these sectors. You want to reduce and eliminate where the greenhouse gases are coming from in transportation, energy industry, agriculture, commercial, and residential. And as we go further down the road, there's going to be more issues associated with climate change that reducing is not going to help. So we have to come up with programs to be resilient, manage disasters, floods in particular, looking at how to deal with the infrastructure side of things and things like population displacement, mitigation, and management. So basically what they're setting up internationally, and when I think this again gets down to local, is you have to have a plan, you take actions, you measure, and you improve it. So there's a continuous improvement process, which you have to have measures to achieve. And this is the graph we've seen in many forms, the CO2 rise that associates with the temperature in the atmosphere. Right now, we're dealing mainly with mitigation, but as we get further in time and as we go up in CO2 concentration, this is, let's say, a range of possibilities. Level of adaptation will change. The more we wait, the more we procrastinate, the more the adaptation side is going to take over, and it's going to cost maybe an order of magnitude more to deal with things later than deal with them now. And part of these adaptation always involves the equity. So having a fair programs to do this. So I just want to emphasize, when I used to talk about these things, I often in the past would kind of soft step around climate change, but I think in reading through the COP26, the federal government rules, CEJA, it's about climate change. And if we're going to address climate change, there's so many opportunities to, in addition to mitigation and adaptation, we can establish, this is a really great chance to establish environmental justice, inclusion, deal with these, the coal plant shutdown through transition, and have accountability of fairness. And then the environmental, which is kind of the world we're all familiar with, clean energy, transportation, air, water, dealing with flooding and severe weather. And then the economic, there's so many opportunities to generate jobs and economic stimulation. And a very big part of this, which is somewhat new to building, businesses up, is we need to engage the communities. I'll talk more about this, but if the communities don't get engaged locally, these programs are going to struggle. So I'm going to start out with the Conference of Parties number 26, which was last month. COP26, as we probably all saw in the news. Just going to state the goals because these are the same goals we share in Illinois at the end of the day. So net zero greenhouse gas by 2050, limit the rise in ambient temperature to 1.5 globally. We're already struggling to reach that. Protect communities and ecosystems. Countries need to provide aggressive plans to reduce greenhouse gas for 2030, and they need to have that by next year. We need to have these measures and have plans that come with it. Collaboration education, once again, and then this is going to be maybe the toughest, is to fairly generate economic opportunity. There are calls to transfer to the tune of $100 billion a year from the rich to the poor. And basically, these are areas that we're looking internationally for aggressive mitigation plans. Our friend renewables, energy use reduction, land use management, zero emission transportation, net zero industry, and reduce agricultural footprint. So these are all the goals that are stated at the international level by this is the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, which is what's really driving the Paris Agreement. And the adaptation strategy to go with it is, again, protect communities and ecosystems, resilience planning, and access to funding to those who need it. And just to baseline this, I showed this a few years ago, and the United States was red, now we're green. This is basically saying everyone in the world has signed up, except for 7 countries in the Middle East which haven't ratified it. So, global commitment. And I also just wanted to kind of step down, kind of put it on a scale here. So you have the international commitment with the IPCC and COP26, and then we have down at the federal level in the US, you have Build Back Better and IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which just passed. And then you've got the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, CEJA in Illinois. And then in Illinois, we get down to some regional programs, which is, there's a lot of power at the local level through the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. The Mayor's Caucus has a program called the Greenest Region Compact, which many of you are probably familiar with. And recently, CMAP and the Mayor's Caucus assembled a climate action plan, which I'll introduce in a little bit. The key thing is, at the end of the day, I mean, this is going to be a theme here. It's the local governments, local entities that are going to take advantage of these, of CEJA and these local regional programs. And with some input from people like you on the call, you know, volunteers and educators, businesses, utilities, and other stakeholders interacting at the local level to deploy change. And the kind of an observation is, these strategies that I just highlighted at the global level, they roll down to the local level. But as you get closer to home, they become more specific. You know, obviously we'll talk about CEJA, but there are so many things that are, you know, that fit our area in terms of what we're going to target. So it's more specific to Illinois or Cook County or whatever. So I'm going to go quickly through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. You know, it's a 1,000-page document, and I'm doing it in 7 bullets. But I just want to give you a sense that, you know, there's a lot of money in there. There's $1.2 trillion over 10 years. And a good portion is for transportation infrastructure, roads and bridges and such, railroad. There's a big part for clean energy infrastructure. And that's $70 billion a year for clean, reliable energy, and $65 billion for the transmission grid. So obviously, if we're going to be generating utility scale solar, you got to get it from A to B. There's also clean transportation infrastructure, which is targeting EV chargers along the corridors for long distance travel, and some within communities will be funded. And they're looking at 500,000 EV chargers. Some other ones, you know, environmental, clean water, replace the lead service lines, a lot of money for climate resilience, cybersecurity, and high-speed internet, and that is scratching the surface. By the way, at the end of the presentation, I have more information and a lot of links. So if somebody wants to drill down, I've got some links. You can do that and knock your socks off. Moving on to the other US bill, the Build Back Better bill or reconciliation bill, which is pending. As you probably all know, it's passed the House. It's in the hands of the Senate. Fundamentally, it's with respect to renewable energy, it's extending tax credits for solar, wind, and EVs. It's got an energy efficiency, consumer rebates. There's a lot of money that's going to go to help energy startup companies. This can be in the form of incentives and or loan programs that have favorable rates and terms. They're trying to target homeowners to weatherize their homes, financing programs for clean energy, focusing on climate smart agricultural and rural clean energy, and once again, training in innovation and equity. And a couple other ones just to highlight. So this is 1.75 trillion, at least today. As it gets through the Senate, that certainly could change, but they're looking at 1.5 million jobs over 10 years. There's a workforce development component to train people to do these jobs. There's $500 million for climate change, which, a good portion is going to go to renewables, energy efficiency, and other forms of clean energy, and including clean energy manufacturing. They're looking at $3 billion to electrify federal fleets and EV charging infrastructure to support them. $2 billion to underserved communities related to climate change. And a good portion of this, and I can't predict what, will be passed down from the federal government to the states. And what form that takes, don't know yet. But in other words, we'll have CEJA funding and some funding that will come from the federal government for clean energy. In the renewable energy field, the Build Back Better is looking to put $89 billion more back into the investment tax credit and an extension thereof. As many of you know, right now you have a 26% tax credit through the end of this year, and next year it drops to 22. And then as it stands today, it ends at the end of next year, or end of 2023. They're looking in the BBBA at a 10-year extension at perhaps 30% ITC, so it may go up. And this is obviously something we're all rooting for. And for low-income residential, they're talking about adding an additional 20% ITC to the 30% for federal taxes. There's also a PTC, which is the production tax credit for wind energy, to the tune of $60 billion. One of the things that could be interesting is these programs have American content requirements, which means if you buy solar panels, they have to be made in America. And they're looking at going down to the component level, not the assembly level. So this one's going to get interesting. The next thing we'll kind of get into the crux of it here. This is CEJA, what's going on in Illinois. And for those that aren't familiar, CEJA has been in battle for a couple, 3 years since its predecessor, the Future Energy Jobs Act, FEJA, was enacted. And FEJA has run out of solar RECs for most of the markets. So this is just a huge win for Illinois. It was passed in September, almost 1,000 pages, and its goals underlying is climate, jobs, and equity. There's thousands of new jobs in Illinois. There's a workforce development with dedicated workforce hubs to train people. There's a lot of diversity and equity requirements built into these jobs programs. There's programs like carbon-free school assessments, so a school can have somebody come in and look at their greenhouse gas, their carbon footprint, and get recommendations. There's a green bank that's going to be formed, which is going to be a funding group that will provide loans for green projects. One of the things that started out a little bit FEJA, but it's just dead center, is communities is in the center of many of the strategies and actions. The word community is used a lot, and rightly so, and then a lot of educational programs. This is sort of the kind of the underlying. I mentioned earlier that there are business development grants and low-cost financing, which is hopefully going to allow businesses to get up and running and accelerate. There are energy efficiency programs, much like there have been before FEJA, and even before that. They're more aggressive. There's also something new, which is called a stretch code. So, right now, state of Illinois, if you're a municipality, you follow what the state efficiency codes are. And there's a code that's coming out shortly, a 2021 code. In a couple of years, CEJA is going to require a stretch code, which basically says a municipality, it'll be more efficient. It'll drive higher levels of efficiency in new construction than the standard code, and a municipality will be allowed to use the stretch codes if they prefer that over the standard code. There's going to be metrics established so we can track our performance and have program accountability, which is a really good thing. There's a big, this was kind of a stumbling block. So we're talking about the decarbonization, and what that means is shutting down coal power plants and natural gas power plants. So what do we do with those people? We can't just just shut down the plant. So there's a whole series of programs for retraining people, repurposing facilities, taking a coal power plant and making a solar power plant. At any rate, that's a big component of the bill. Transportation was not in CEJA, it's very strong in CEJA. So the state is looking to target the ability to have 1 million EVs and having public charging infrastructure to support it. There's going to be EV rebates and EV charger rebates, and there's something called a beneficial electrification program, which ties in EV charging with some utility requirements that I'll touch on in a second. Another big one that's kind of a game changer is utility accountability. This is something, as many of you know, ComEd and Exelon have had a lot of political influence over the years. They've gotten in some trouble over the last few years, and as a consequence, the groups that organized this bill were able to change how ComEd, or the utilities, Ameren too, how they get paid. So in the past, they would get paid on a cost basis, so they could adjust their margins based on their costs. And now it's a performance base. So they'll have metrics for the kilowatt hours efficiencies, how they roll out some of these programs, greenhouse gas reduction, and at any rate, those will be how they get paid. If they meet the targets that are set, they make the margins they planned on. If they fall short, they fall short. At the same time, kind of to make sure that it's done right, there's going to be an oversight group, and they will establish rules for the accountability of the utility. So this is a big change for Illinois. As we all know, in the storage or the solar world, if we're going to be raising the RPS to 30, 40, 50, 100%, we're going to need energy storage. So right now, the state has said, rather than stipulate energy storage programs and transmissions to support it, we need to study. So they're going to put a timetable on and say, we're going to figure out what the state needs, where they need it, how that works with the grid, how that works with planned solar plants, and come up with a plan. And from there would likely be incentives and business development programs to encourage it. But there wasn't enough knowledge yet to do that. Similarly, monetization of carbon, there's going to be an evaluation. They're going to come up with a program to try and drive greenhouse gas production through a monetization scheme. The last one here is they subsidized the nuclear power plants, but it was done to protect 2,000 nuclear jobs, as well as that is what supplies 50% of our state's power. So we couldn't exactly allow those power plants to shut down until we start getting some renewable capacity. So on to, I'm guessing, all of your favorite subjects. So renewable energy, solar focus. So what we're doing is to put Illinois on a path to 100% renewable energy, primarily through decarbonization, and at the same time, we're getting a clean air. These are the current targets in CEJA: 40% renewable energy, which basically means the production rate of power in the state has to be 40% renewable in 2030, 50% by 2040. There is no statement of 100% in 2050, but that's an unwritten goal. Along the way, we're going to be adding this energy storage and new distribution infrastructure. And some other measures for the Illinois power sector is they want to have carbon-free power by then 2045, which means all fossil fuel power plants will be shut down by the end of 2045. They're looking for an interim goal, have a 45% CO2 equivalent reduction by 2035. And at the same time, they're looking to improve the numbers on SOx, NOx, and particulates. So for those who aren't familiar, the Illinois Power Agency is the agency that sets the rules for buying renewable energy credits. So they have long-running, the long-term renewable resource procurement plan, which many of you are familiar with. They revised it in August, And they said, we're not going to do anything till we know what's going on with CEJA. So now they know they're doing a CEJA, so they're in the process of revising it. One of the things that was kind of, I don't know if it's a waiver, if you will, is they wanted to address the solar cliff. So within 90 days of the act, which is going to be somewhere around December 15th, I haven't seen this officially, but 90 days from September 15th, anything less than 25 kilowatt can get SRECs, solar renewable energy credits. They did say that it's going to be, the value of an SREC is going to be 4% less than the last open block from CEJA. These are going to be 15-year forward procurement like CEJA, which means you will get if you have solar panels on your roof, you'll get 15 years worth of RECs at the time of purchase or soon thereafter. Also for projects that are in wait lists, they will be prioritized. So if you had a project that ran out of RECs, you will be at the front of the queue for this work. So on top of that, there's a supplemental REC procurement plan, which has to be a plan within 120 days of the act, and 240 days later, or 240 days after the act, they have to have a plan in place for the RECs. And what's really good is they're looking at 10 million RECs to be available by the end of this year. That says 2021, I think that's 2022. But these are for new projects. And they're going to ramp up to 45 million RECs delivered annually by the end of 2030. And just if in the other form of earlier versions, instead of 10 million, this was 4 million. Instead of 45 million, it was 5 million. So it's really ramped up the amount of RECs, which is obviously going to ramp up the marketplace. This is ratepayer funded. And they also stipulate, it's going to be managed by the utilities like CEJA, but the funds are not subject to sweeps, administrative charges, or chargebacks, which I just like saying that. So the adjustable block program, which again, for those who are familiar, it says there's a number of categories. I'll say there's probably 20 categories now. And for each category, they get a different amount of money per REC. And one REC is the amount of is worth 1 megawatt hour generated over the course of a year. So that if you get a lot of megawatt hours, you get a lot of RECs. And so if you're a resident, you'll get one rate. If you're a utility, you'll get a lower rate. If you're community solar, you'll get a different rate. If you're a low-income community, you'll get an adder for it, et cetera. So they learned a lot of lessons in CEJA. And this procurement is going to take place. It's probably ongoing. And as I mentioned, there's a wait list. So if you look at the projects that were energized from CEJA, most of the small distributed generation was fulfilled, as well as the large, but only 32% of the community solar projects were energized. The community solar programs were later in the game, and they got held up by COVID. And again, these will be prioritized based on a wait list. So of all the REC procurements, they're targeting 55% for solar and 45% for wind. And of the 55% solar, half are going to be from solar photovoltaic projects under Section K, which I'll show you in a second, 47% utility, 3% from brownfield sites that are not in the community renewable generation portfolio. So this next slide is kind of the new stuff. I'm calling it Section K because it's Section 175, Section K. It's referred to a lot in CEJA, but in the adjustable block program, of the funding that we made available of the RECs, 20% comes from small solars, 25 kilowatts. Again, in CEJA, this was 10 kilowatts, so it's expanded upwards. 20% from this 25 kilowatts to 5,000 kilowatt, and they're going to have some subcategories for commercial, small, large commercial, and public and nonprofit customers, which means those are adjustable blocks that will have different rates in this category of 20%. 30% is community renewable generation projects, which is more or less what community solar was in CEJA. That was 2,000 kilowatts. It's now 5,000 kilowatts or 5 megawatts. There's another one, it's 15% for public schools, 5% for community-driven solar projects under 500 kilowatts. And what that means is you have to have a community standing behind the project, and you're going to be engaging community people to install it and operate it and such. And then this is another new one. It's called equity eligible contractors for distributed generation less than 5 megawatts. And what that means is you have to meet certain requirements as a contractor. Things like minority-owned businesses will fall under this. So what it means is, whereas before all the community solar fell under this category here, and all the money from the RECs got sucked up, now you have these local abilities to put in community, I call it community solar, where you can actually put community solar in a community rather than a farm out in, one of the western counties in Illinois. So this is opens up a whole new set of opportunities, largely tied to lower income or equity eligible people, but it's a really good thing. And then they've got to catch all that. If there's leftover funds, the agency can determine what to do with it. And just under the community solar, so as applied to the prior slide, they really want to increase the diversity of the community solar process. They also, I heard from more than one person that they weren't sure if they could trust the people knocking on their door about subscribing to a community solar project. They're going to have a standardized disclosure process to try and discourage deceptive marketing. So lesson learned. The community solar program is going to be the adjustable block. And as I showed you, they didn't get that far on the CEJA bill. So 50% of the capacity is initially going to come from this established wait list. And the balance is going to be kind of from that previous chart. There will also be in that 30%, you'll still have these like small distributed, large distributed community solar, plus the new programs, which actually was the prior slide. Oh no, sorry, this is right. So there's also low income solar, Illinois Solar for All. They have a pilot program, less than 2 megawatts, but it has to be targeted to a community. Low income community solar, you have to have community stakeholders. There's a low income multifamily, a low income single family. So these are all new. There's community solar tied to Illinois Solar for All. And then there's another interesting target called the Energy Sovereignty Grant Program. And that means that a community has to actually have equity. And they have to be there kind of in there for the long haul. And so they can get funded for planning and siting, business development and the jobs programs and more. And they're talking about putting $34 million per year into all these programs, of which 25% goes into the Energy Sovereignty Grant Program. The program from CEJA was 10 million, it's going up to 50 million. And there will be a component in the Illinois Solar for All to support community-based education. One other thing that's probably going to hit home for a number of you on the call, there are some solar contractor requirements. Some of these were in CEJA, but they are, I think, trying to be a little more stringent because they want to make sure that the people installing these things are properly trained and safe. So in order to get funding, you're going to have a journeyman electrician, register the DOL, or register as an apprentice and being supervised, or have more than 5 years, 8,000 hours, having NABCEP or UL or ETAI L3 or an associate in applied science from an Illinois Community College, having a certification. Those all also qualify. So a lot of the workforce development that's going to occur, may end up falling under one or both of these categories. And that's, we have to figure out how that's going to happen. So the idea is, in order to achieve these qualifications, we'll use these workforce hubs. There'll be a standardized solar PV curriculum to develop and then feed the workforce with qualified contractors. Another thing for some of the programs that I mentioned, it's the equity eligible as a portion of the solar RECs. They have to have equity investment in some of these programs. I'm not going to go through them, but I just want to point out there's a lot of programs and a lot of opportunities for people to participate in the jobs development program. One other thing, prevailing wage applies to all renewable energy projects except residential. So any of the community solar or utility, there's a prevailing wage component. I wanted to touch on beneficial electrification because it's such an important part of CEJA, and there is a renewable energy link. So the concept is we're going through all this change to reduce greenhouse gas and pollution. Why not reduce the electricity costs while we're doing it? And it's very doable. The primary focus has been transportation electrification, EVs, and charging for beneficial electrification. The idea is to drive people when they're charging, in particular, to consume off-peak and leverage renewable power. So, use solar electrons when you're charging your EV. And the goal is to flatten the load. So if we can be using distributed power rather than centrally generated power plants, we're not having to turn on and off peaker plants. We can reduce the cost of power generation while we're increasing the amount of renewable energy. And so the idea is if you can integrate EV charging with renewable energy and energy storage, and then work on demand management so that you're basically taking battery power and using that, you're storing it, off peak and then using it on peak, you can reduce the grid costs or possibly even get paid to do that. And then there's other things, vehicle to grid, where you can exchange electrons between the vehicle and the grid. And this falls under the moniker of distributed energy resources. And right now, for all this, the Illinois Commerce Commission is in the process of making and setting rules for rate structures and such for beneficial electrification. And then once those rules are set, the utilities are responsible for rolling it out. And just to give you a snapshot, so distributed energy resource, it's basically stuff that's on the customer side of the meter or behind the meter, including distributed generation or solar, as is shown in this picture. So the idea is that you could have stationary, which is shown on the right, energy storage, and then also mobile storage, and they can interchange electrons through a management system. In addition to charging the vehicles, you can have demand response managementization technologies, which allows you to optimize the grid, and then you're using smart devices in the internet and things like that. So this is a coming thing that ties solar and EV charging together. I mentioned some of this in addition to the renewable energy, the transportation. They're extending the ideas in CEJA for energy efficiency. Appliances through innovation continue to get more innovative. There's incentives for these products. The goal is the energy codes are released every, I think it's 3 years, and each year they're becoming more and more closer to net zero. And so the idea is to continue to do that. I mentioned this, we're implementing it, the 2021 version, and the 2024, the stretch codes will be available, which hopefully will accelerate the move to net zero. So now I'm getting a little closer to home. That's a kind of a wrap on CEJA. So this is kind of our part of the world, assuming most people on the call are from Cook and the Collier counties. I want to start with Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, or CMAP. CMAP, many of you are probably familiar with them. They study the region and they look for what we should be doing now and in the future for goods and services in Cook and the Collier counties, including transportation, housing, economic development, open space, land, the environment, and other quality of life issues. They have a product that they put together called On to 2050, which is details all the ideas they suggest. This is used by municipalities in the region to plan. CMAP also gets a lot of money from the federal government. They're going to get money from the Infrastructure Act, for example, probably Build Back Better as well. And they use that for transportation as an example, for congestion mitigation, air quality programs, and climate mitigation and adaptation programs. So this is just a quick snapshot of how they see our region. And this gets down into the, why it's important locally. You hear about the ice caps melting. It's not too important, but when we get property damage from flooding, that means something. When we get pollution in our lakes and rivers, that means something. So dwindling groundwater, changes in habitats, changing the species breakdown, more health challenges with the changes in temperature and the changes in season, and transportation changes because we've got weather-related events that are more frequent. Same thing, strained energy and water infrastructure. There are a lot of changes due to economic opportunities due to the change in the growth of the population industry, which creates challenges for existing industries. But bottom line is there's a greater risk of climate-related harm to lower income residents, the elderly, and population of color. And this comes from the On to 2050 report. Going down perhaps another level, we're at the municipal level with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, they have an environmental team that basically tries to identify what the municipalities, the 275 municipalities in Northern Illinois, need in the areas of energy and water and transportation, waste and pollution, and land use. So the idea is a community, if they want to become a member of the Grand Street Compact, they have to sign, it's called a GRC resolution. And basically, this is a document which the mayor, city manager, or village president will sign that says, we're going to be sustainable. We're going to develop programs to be sustainable. And there's something called the framework, which is a tool, which is shown up here. It's still hard to see, but it allows you, there's like over 1,000 ideas in 10 topic areas. And the idea is we did this where I live in Park Ridge. We took this set of ideas and we distilled it down to what we thought was important for our community. And any community that wants to do it can do it. And it's a built-in toolkit. It gives you a jump start. And there's also programs to align, again, going back up the hill, up to the region, state, and global. The GRC also gives access, or the Mayor's Caucus provides access to leverage and other resources. And it educates the member municipalities on sustainability in general. So these are the framework areas, and there's 10 of them, and each has a good number of ideas in the framework. So these are all consistent, kind of what we've been talking about. And last year, or this year, the Mayor's Caucus started a new program. And this is pretty cool. It's called the Climate Action Plan for the Chicago region. It's the same area. It's the same Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. They work with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, and they put this program together. And what's really interesting is the MMC applied for this global program, and it was selected out of all the cities in the country. There were 4 selected: DC, us, Kansas City, and Denver. And basically the idea was to establish a plan for climate action in the region. It's funded by the European Union and some others. And there's a partner company or organization called the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. So it's a good fit. They're the ones that are going to be managing the greenhouse gas inventory. And they held a lot of meetings and gathered a lot of information from listening sessions in the region, working with NOAA, working with CMAP, and working with something called the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit, which is a federal resource for resilience planning. And much like the GRC, there's a climate action plan municipal resolution. So the GRC, I think there's like 135 communities in Illinois that have signed on. There's maybe 10 that have signed on to this. The difference here is the GRC was kind of a, we're going to be sustainable and we're signing a document. This is has measurable targets. So the idea is you'll be signing up that you're going to achieve or strive for these goals. I'm going to go through this list. So there's this goal is to get from 2005 levels to have a 50% reduction. And this would be, let's say, for your municipality or your county or your region, however you measure it. And then that ramps up to 80% in 2050. And so where that stands now, and this program is kind of just started, and these are sort of the objective areas. Demonstration of leadership, which means get communities to sign up, working at decarbonization, building energy reduction, use reduction, implement clean energy policies, which is CEJA, transportation, which is the EV programs, reduce vehicle miles traveled, maybe ride your bike, manage water and waste sustainably. All these go towards reducing climate impacts, and also possibly sequestering carbon through tree planting and such. On the adaptation side, there's a goal here at 2030, basically that if you're a municipality, that you actually have a climate adaptation plan, that you're looking at resilience in your policies and programs. And in 2040, the idea is it will be kind of spreading to more and more jurisdictions. And then in 2050, it will be basically the whole region will have this policy of resilience. Again, these somewhat aspirational, but that's the plan. The objectives right now, we're talking about a lot of education. We want to make sure to incorporate equity and inclusion. You need to plan ahead and collaborate with people within your own cities and also in your region. You need to build capacity because these are shared problems. Start developing plans and policies focused on these areas in adaptation resilience, and start looking at your budgets and adapting the investments and operations, knowing these things are coming. Much like the GRC had a framework, this is it's the document for tracking and planning within the climate action plan. So the idea here is that you have a strategy related to, in this case, resilience. You've got categories here that allow you to track that this is where you're going to take action. What's the role of the municipality? Where are you? How much? Is it, how hard is it? Who else should you talk to? And what are you looking to accomplish? And this is, there's several of these in the CAP, which I'm providing a link to, but it's a really cool program that gets you a lot of ideas. So right now, the effort for the Mayor's Caucus is getting municipalities engaged. And they're going to be updating the Greenest Region Compact. And I think in essence, they're going to marry the two so that it's kind of one system. They're looking to raise funds so they can support it with staffing, develop foster partnerships, and then look at how to do this regionally. So I want to sew this back together with the earlier diagram. So right now, if we look at this new group I mentioned, it's a goal covenant of mayors for climate and energy. Their responsibility is measure and monitor climate action plans across the globe on behalf of the Paris Agreement and the IPCC. And the idea is they will set global targets, which filter down to local targets, which filter down to local governments. And at the same time, as those entities capture data, they'll pass them back up the chain so that we know how we're doing, in this case, internationally. And although it doesn't exist yet, we do now have some interaction with the federal government through NOAA, but over time, I think we're going to have state goals and measures and federal that get fed up similar to what we're doing now. So this is the way, having these interchanges of data and actions to follow, because once you find data is great, what do you do with it? How do you make good decisions and spending money and changing policies? That's what the measurements are for, and that's part of what the global covenants will participate in. just for, I know I've talked to several people about what's different between the Green Region Compact and the Climate Action Policy or Program. This is an excerpt from the GRC framework about renewable energy. Basically, these are categories, and they're similar to the CAP. What the CAP specifically is looking at is greenhouse gas reduction potential. So these two are going to be tied together over time. Right now, the GRC framework is still the primary tool. And ultimately, there'll be an integration. And then tied to this, there will be regional initiatives and measures. This is another example of a regional program, which many of you are probably familiar with, and that's SolSmart. So SolSmart was a US DOE funded program to assist communities develop deploying rooftop solar by streamlining processes, having a solar webpage for each community where so residents and contractors can go to a site and say, what are the requirements, what forms do I have to fill out? It makes it really easy. They talked about going from a 30-day permitting process to 3 days by doing this. And there's a number of other things that are involved in getting your municipal teams up to speed. There's a scoring system and a recognition system. There's a bronze, silver, and gold. The idea is that, you know, the more you put into this, the higher the level. So far, there's about 35 Chicago communities that are SolSmart. Related to that, there's an EV Ready program, which is kind of SolSmart for electric vehicle charging. And so now we're moving into transportation electrification. The same idea is that we're going to be streamlining the processes and leveraging best practices and education. And this is, again, at the municipal level. There was an initial program that got rolled out last year, which provided a checklist, which would be part of the scoring system, and a decision guide was provided to help municipalities make informed decisions about charging and EVs and projects and such. Right now, we're hoping to roll this out next year and to have an EV Ready program ready to bring municipalities up to speed. So when I got into this, I was curious. It's kind of why I did it. You know, is the stuff at the global level, federal level, local level, is it aligned? And the answer is, surprisingly, it's very aligned. It's not perfect, but basically for all these categories that I've been talking about, there are programs in the IPCC world at the federal level, Illinois CEJA and CAP 2021 or the GRC. So there is good alignment, which that's good policy. So that's a really good thing, because hopefully it flows right. And just to kind of wrap up this whole hierarchy, you know, looking at going from top to bottom, you know, we've been talking about everybody short of the beneficiaries. You know, at the global level, you've got, it's largely target setting and the measurement and tracking and this exchange of money between governments. For us, the national government, you know, there is some policies and rules that will get rolled down, but and some funding that will make it down. A lot of what applies to our world starts at the state. Clearly the policies, the rules program, and the funding via CEJA in this case. And at the local level, in my mind, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. This is where you've got the rules, codes, ordinance, permits, inspections, enforcement. This is where you have to change the culture. You have to have the community involved. You have to have a lot of planning and collaboration. Most of this is going to occur locally. And down here, we got the beneficiaries, all of us here that can leverage incentives, people that can get training programs, education, and jobs. But one thing, and again, maybe you probably heard Greta say the stuff going on in the COP26 was blah, blah, blah. And I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but my point is the action is local. And I want to just emphasize that more than once. If we're going to be successful at whatever, growing solar, reducing carbon, community action and leadership is an essential component to mitigate and adapt. And the municipalities in particular, you know, they have a upfront and center role, assuring compliance and safety. They have investments of technology for themselves and the public they support, they can support education, and they're required to collaborate regionally. So a lot of what, in my mind, has to be done is working with municipalities. And not to forget, the other really important part of this is the business community. So all this money that gets pumped into jobs, well, they've got to find a place to work. There's production, there's installation. The market, to accelerate this at the pace we need to be able to stand up these businesses to walk and then run. And a lot of this relies on innovation to get some of this change to occur. And this means we have to have successful business models. A long-term goal for businesses is profitability, of course, without incentives. We need to move to a sustainable laissez-faire market where, again, it's standing on its own 2 feet. And a lot of businesses are already taking the step. They're leading the green economy with climate change, greenhouse reduction through EVs, renewable energy efficiency, et cetera. And a lot of that is driven by the voice of the customer, so the buying behavior. So this is showing the path of CO2 equivalents. This is actually the Chicago area, and these are the current estimates. If we do nothing, it's going to increase. And if we take on all these programs that were implied in those goals for the CAP, Climate Action Plan, we can get it down to something like 80%. That's the goal, which leaves 20% that we're going to have to get from innovation, which is going to really end up, we're going to end up relying on businesses. And as many of you are familiar with, this is the solar PV dollar per watt cost since 2014. This has been a curve that's been going down and down for years and years. At the same time, the demand for grid energy storage is going to be skyrocketing. And they also see a similar trend to the solar PV with vehicle battery costs. In 2010, it was like $620 a kilowatt hour for a battery. And now we're down, depending on who you talk to, in the $150 range. And when we get to this blue line, they're saying that we will reach cost parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. And in my mind, when that happens, the game's over. Costs you less to drive it, costs you less to buy it. So kind of a last idea I want to, in going through this and talking to a lot of people about CEJA in particular, we need to spend the money and leverage these programs smartly. And we need to make measurable differences, but we need to be successful. We don't want to, as they've said, leave stranded assets. That's happened in the renewable energy market. So when programs and money are spent, it has to be economically viable. It also has to have energy equity. So it has to be applied fairly across the social political spectrum. It should drive environmental improvement while we're doing this and create a standard of living and quality of life for all involved. So to me, we have to do all four together smartly. Not every solution in the quiver of things that are being considered in CEJA are the same. So the plans, the circumstances, and timing depend on, they change, they depend on technology maturity, the need or demand, what's the status of education to deploy this, how are we measuring it, et cetera. So to me, when we do these CEJA programs, we need to be smart. So my last thing is just kind of a pitch, and not so much for solar per se, but for people who want to participate in the climate mitigation change that's happening and will continue to happen. And again, we have this hierarchy going from local to global. Basically, the general public, their role is to vote in people who will support the right programs and buy stuff that supports sustainable businesses. And at the same time, the loop comes back around, and laws and regulations that can support sustainable practices can come from these government sources. So how do we as individuals and groups help to accelerate climate change mitigation, and with clean energy in particular? My suggestion is all of us, or many of us, should help in educating the general public Getting to the municipality and community leadership is a really big one because they're the ones that are going to be making some of the harder decisions. Local businesses, much the same. As I keep saying, it's a local phenomenon. We need to get participation. We need to get collaborative community-based programs and projects. And a lot of opportunities in CEJA are coming from low-income and BIPOC communities, Black and Indigenous people of color. So there's a lot of opportunities that are going to occur locally. And one thing that I wanted to mention to this group is this idea of distributed energy and beneficial electrification. You know, a lot of it's, you know, it sounds like, oh, that's about EVs and stuff. Well, it really is about integrating renewables, energy storage, peak demand management, and EV charging. And this is where the world is heading, Illinois included. It's being funded by CEJA. It's, you know, the rules aren't all set. But if I were some of you, I would be looking at this seriously. I have solar panels on my roof. As soon as the incentives for batteries come out, I'm putting some battery storage in my basement. So this is an adjunct to your businesses. So basically, the solar industry is kind of ready to rock and roll. Couple last comments about, you know, using your voice. And say it again: collaboration. You know, look, you know, join up with other people, get the word out, talk to the utilities, get involved in clean energy meetings and share your knowledge. Educate first by learning and second by passing the word on. Friends, family, coworkers, your vendors, your communities. If you can, support your community signing on to and acting on the Mayor's Caucus, GRC, and CAP resolutions. Get involved with something you're passionate about and vote climate action. And as Walt Disney said, the best way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So with that, that's the end of my slides. Before I start the questions, I want to just quickly go down. I've got a list of acronyms here. I have some links here to these are the actual bills for the wonky ones. I've got some other information. Here's some stuff from the getting some other documents and some other you know, background on some of the CEJA programs. So I think Nicola is going to post the PowerPoints. And so those additional bits of stuff are available. So with that, I thank you for your patience, and let's start doing the Q&A.
Great, thanks so much, Tim. We do have some great questions coming in already, some of which were questions about, you know, where they can get more information. So yes, we will be sending out your PowerPoint as well as a recording of this presentation tomorrow. So the first question, and there was a related question later, was what does it mean to ratepayers to have solar generation within or close by urban areas? And the other question was, I think, how does CEJA affect ratepayers?
I missed the first part of the question.
Oh, okay. So one of them was, you know, what is the effect of CEJA on ratepayers? And relatedly, what does it mean to ratepayers to have solar generation within or close by urban areas?
Well, the first thing is, so there is on each of our bills, there's an RPS number, Renewable Portfolio Standard, that we each pay in our bill every month. That's going to continue to be a part of your bill, and that's going to go into the kitty that supports the REC program. So it's to the extent that a particular region, if let's say is a low income region, they're going to have access to higher value RECs because they're low income, or if it's community solar, they may get more value to the RECs. So it doesn't come in by how much you pay in. Everybody pays in the same proportional rate, I believe. What comes is when you put in solar, the RECs will vary depending on your economic situation.
Great. With the passage of CEJA, how does Illinois stack up against other states? Are we cutting edge or just middle of the pack?
I would say we're closer to cutting edge. You know, we're not California quite yet, but this is really quite a package. It's really amazing that the people down in Springfield got this done. It is a very powerful bill, and it, you know, ranks up there in the top 5 in the country, I would say.
Yeah, Tim, it's Leslie. If I can just jump in there. Yeah, I would say as a climate package, because that's what the policy is being touted as. Yeah, it is definitely cutting edge, and honestly, a feather in Illinois, as well as our governor's cap, because you know the Governor Pritzker and his staff worked very hard on the to ensure this was a climate bill. With some really good support for clean energy. Yeah.
Yeah. Al would like to know more about the Green Bank. Are there any details about availability, eligibility, and terms? Any further details?
I do not know. It is in the bill. One of the links that I provided at the end there, you can go to the CEJA bill. It's an HTML file and just do a search on Green Bank, and you know, it's a 960-page bill. There's probably a few pages on the subject. I don't know the answer specifically, but it's in there.
Great.
There's a number of funding mechanisms in addition to the Green Bank. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember we just passed this legislation in September, and it does take a while to build out what has been envisioned to function in the real world. So I think that the Green Bank is to be continued in the future, what that exactly looks like and how it's built out.
One of the things, I was on a call with a guy named Jigar Shah, who runs the loan program for the US DOE, and he explained that, you know, everybody thinks, oh, we're giving away all this money and incentives, and what they're trying to do is, you know, develop businesses through loan programs. Instead of having a loan shark, you got the federal government, which is giving you a low interest loan and long term. So, you know, maybe a 10-year payback. And what it means is we're investing in businesses that will pay the money back with interest. So it's really not over time an out-of-pocket expense. And that's a significant part of these programs. And that's true in Illinois as well. So.
Yeah. Is there a timetable to ramp up renewable efficiency storage in order to phase out nuclear power?
This in CEJA, it's not defined. As I mentioned, there's a commitment to come up with an energy storage program plan, and that's part of it. But by definition, because we are ramping up the RECs and ramping up the RPS up to 40% by date certain, we can't do that without energy storage. So what that timetable is somewhat defined by the RPS, this increase in renewable energy production. So it has to be defined, it has to be deployed. And the timetable is going to be along that path. So by 2040, you know, it's my opinion, but we're going to have a lot of energy storage at utility scale, local scale, in people's basements, you know, distributed. But I don't know the schedule and I don't know the details.
Okay.
And nobody does.
Yeah. These goals are impressive, but we've had less aggressive goals and not achieved them. What are the consequences of missing the goals?
That sounds rhetorical. And I'm not being flippant. It's a really important subject because, and kind of what I was beating up a little bit is education and collaboration, working with communities. You know, this isn't going to happen by itself. Just by putting the bill out there, it easily could fail unless people start learning about it and doing things about it, and you know, caring about climate. It's which so far has been an uphill battle, but you know, it's got momentum, and hopefully we can get there.
Okay. Do you have any source of data about community solar market penetration, such as what % of households in each zip code are subscribing to community solar? Additionally, does the IPA or some other agency provide this data? I'm not sure this data is public, but you may know more.
I do not know. That would be a question for the IPA. As I pointed out, they only got 35% of the community solar projects up, energized. And I don't know what happens to the subscribers in those cases for the 65% that didn't get up. So I don't know the answer. It's an interesting question, and it speaks to the earlier question about success versus no success. But they are trying to, right now, as I mentioned, 50% of the RECs are going to go to those waitlisted community solar programs to hopefully get those up and running. But I think IPA is the only one I know of that would have that data. I do not. So I don't know.
Where or what additional resources can be provided for the Energy Sovereignty Community Solar Incentive Program? That might be in one of your links at the end.
You broke up a little there.
Oh, sorry. This person, Sean, was looking for additional resources for the Energy Sovereignty Community Solar.
Oh, yeah. Go to the CEJA bill. Again, as I said, it's Senate Bill 2406, and just do a search on energy sovereignty, and there's a fair amount of discussion on the details in there. That would be what I would recommend.
Okay. Where do municipalities go to obtain their GHG levels, and how well they're doing in reducing?
Well, I would say there's a handful of communities in the Chicago area that could answer that question, that have actually started to measure or do measure. The vast majority have not started. That's what the Climate Action Plan is kind of trying to kick off, is if you get that the resolution signed, you're going to have to start measuring. It's primarily, power usage, and transportation, possibly some water and waste components. But I think one of the things that the Climate Action Plan is going to try and guide communities is, let's start simple. Let's start thinking about it. Let's start measuring things. Maybe you measure the energy use in City Hall, and you put in energy efficient appliances, and you take credit for that. And they're coming up with some toolkits to allow municipalities in particular to assemble some measures and start tracking it. It's I would say it's not popular, but again, it's a commitment, and the only way we're going to be able to know if we're doing the right thing is to measure and track. But that's going to be a tough one. It's going to be tough to get municipalities to start doing it, but they have to. And I think we need. I've talked to a lot of people, like my friends at Sierra Club. We think we can influence that, or you go into different green groups. Having citizen volunteers go in and say, this is so important. What are you going to do? And how are you going to do it? And it can be done, and there's tools to do it. It's just somebody has to do it, and you'll probably get pushback from somebody in the city saying, we don't have anybody on staff to do that. Well, Greenwich Region Core is a volunteer, or it's not a volunteer group, so it's a kind of college level kids. They can come in and do that for you, as an example. That's part of the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus program. So it's more or less having the light bulb go on and then coming up with approaches to do it. And the Mayor's Caucus in particular can help municipalities figure the answers out.
Great. What resources are available for community leadership outside of the Chicago area?
Is that a question more, is that within Illinois or nationally?
Within Illinois, but maybe in central Illinois or southern Illinois.
Yeah. So it's part of like the workforce hub development. There will be workforce hubs in various places around the state. CEJA is very conscious about the fact that you've got, Cook and the Collier counties, and then the rest of the state. There are specific provisions for, the 100% rural communities and programs, and supporting educational programs and incentives and business programs that are targeting kind of the non-Chicago parts of the state. What form they are now is a tougher question, because I think these things still, on the education side, I think these programs have to yet be formed. I know there are groups like Chicago Area Clean Cities is talking about setting up some statewide education, but we need to have workforce training programs all around the state. I don't think it's been decided who's going to do that, but it's been decided that the state is going to do that.
Okay, the plan looks good and has a lot of detail, but who monitors the compliance and incentives?
So that's a multifaceted set of solutions. So I lost count as to how many programs there are, but the IPA is responsible for setting the rates for the RECs. There are other agencies, Department of Commerce, Economic Opportunity, and Illinois EPA. They all have roles of accountability for different parts of the bill. So there's a big it depends factors, but I can say that an accountability standard is another central theme in CEJA. If there's a program, there's an accountability system. There are checks and balances, there are performance measures, there are, you have to provide reports, whatever, annually or otherwise. So it is built in, but there's so many dimensions to it, it's hard to detail, but it's built in.
Great. How does CEJA work with the Reimagining Electric Vehicles Act?
That's a separate act. It's a separate pool of money, basically support EV manufacturing and parts, including batteries. So it's certainly complementary, synergistic, but it's a different bill and a different set of funding targeting manufacturing versus people buying EVs and chargers.
Okay, and this is the last question we have so far. So if you have a question you're typing out, now is the time to do it. But Michael would like to know, will non-for-profits such as faith-based or churches benefit from any of these programs?
Yes, there is. On the solar side, there are carve-outs, I guess is the word, for not-for-profit, which includes religious, houses of worship, municipalities, other public groups. They will get. It will show up in the adjustable block program for solar. I can't say what it's going to be, but based on CEJA, the predecessor bill, there was consideration for that. One of the reasons that it's a different set of numbers is because those are non-taxable entities. You as if you're a business and you put solar up, you can get depreciation credits. You can get investment tax credits where a nonprofit or municipality can't. So they're trying to compensate through the REC value in the adjustable block program.
We should also mention, it's Leslie, we should also mention that although prevailing wage will need to be paid on the majority of projects here in the state, as Tim said, residential projects will not have to pay prevailing wage, and neither will houses of worship or multifamily homes. So another kind of little carrot to ensure, just to ensure that, the houses of worship don't have barriers to participation.
Great. We did have a small series of questions get submitted. Will utility rates be raised? And then a question about school programs and more gas plants. So I guess maybe answer the first question first.
So the goal of the CEJA is there will be rate caps. So if the rates were to go up, they're going to be capped. The other thing is now we have performance-based metrics on the dollar per kilowatt hour, the cost of energy. And there is the beneficial electrification program, which intentionally is going to drive down the cost of electricity. It may take a while to, there's going to be some investments that have to be made. CEJA will be supporting it. So there may be, in initially, few years, there may be new costs that don't exist, but then over time, the cost should be reduced to the consumer across the board. And for those that invest in solar on their roofs or EV charging or get involved with demand management programs in their homes and businesses, you can have even greater savings. So somebody who is paying through their electrical bill, they're paying into the program to support the RECs, they may end up over time, in theory, they could end up paying less, but the people who invest in the renewable and the EV stuff and the distributed energy stuff, they're going to benefit quite a bit over time. And the second question was schools. Is that what it was?
Yeah. So there is a provision for solar for schools in the bill, isn't there?
There is. There's an allocation basically it'll be in the adjustable block program, a carve out for school solar. Yeah. Again, it's going to be something probably, it'll be a better rate than other programs because it's going for public schools. And there was something else. Yeah, education, was it?
Oh, the third question was whether there might be more gas plants, but I don't know if that is.
Natural gas. So natural gas has to be offline by the end of 2045. I haven't heard the last word. I think there was one project that may still get built, but it has to be offline by 2045. And I think they're debating what to do right now. So there's been a lot of pushback on adding even natural gas power for a full size, large natural gas plant. I don't think that stops the development of maybe some smaller peaker plants, but the goal is to continue to reduce and eliminate that.
Another question came in. If nuclear plants return to profitability, is there any provisions to return ratepayer investment back to the payers?
What a lovely thought. I'll say I doubt it. I don't know. It doesn't sound like nuclear power plants. But the bottom line is they've been at this a long time, and I've never heard their operating costs go down. So, and does anybody on the call know more about that? I don't know.
I don't think so. That's the last question I have.
And by the way, I mean, at some point we're going to, in theory, be taking the nukes offline. So.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it for the questions. Thanks so much, everyone, for great questions and for joining us tonight. And thanks so much to Tim for a great presentation. Leslie, I'm not sure if you wanted to say anything else. Oh, you're muted.
How about that?
That's good.
I just want to thank everybody for sticking around. It's a lot of information, but it's really important information. And I think you have all the news that's fit to print at this point of where things stand. I also want to thank Tim again for his considerable efforts here putting this really impressive presentation together. We appreciate you, Tim.
Yep.
And watch for communications from us coming out the next couple of days. If you're an ISEA member, either with the Education Association or the Energy Association, I just want to remind folks that we just announced our membership meeting, which is happening on December 14th. Representative Sean Caston will be joining us and doing a little bit, another overview of what's happening at the federal level. So thanks everybody again for taking the time tonight. We appreciate you.
And if I could just
everybody
ditto the thank you. And one thing that there's a lot of questions remain be answered on CEJA. So one thing that you might consider in, I don't know, March, April, I don't know when exactly, having another discussion when more decisions have been made about adjustable block and the rates and such, because that's when it's going to get interesting. So look forward to having those answers. I'm sure everybody else does. And again, thank you for your attendance and participation.
Take care, everybody. Thanks, Tim.